Okay, hello everybody. It's good to be with you today again. This is the Camden Haven Anglican Church Down. My name's Nathan Killick, and changed the lighting a little bit. I don't know if you noticed that, but I've got only one light going today. I don't know. Just thought it might work. We'll see. So if you think it's a little bit dark here, then I'll change it. Anyway, hopefully tonight we'll have a special guest, and we're going to see whether he's able to come on board, and that'll be a little bit later though. As I said, my name's Nathan Killick, and this is the Camden Haven Anglican Church Drill Down, and this is where we drill down a bit on the passage that we looked at last week, the Sunday previous, so that we can take the time to look at the things that possibly on Sunday we didn't have the time to look at. Now, I'm so pleased that so many people are enjoying this. It's really great. After a week or so, there's been, I don't know, a few views. Let me have a look. I can actually check that. Let's have a look there. How do I do that? So, well, let me tell you, first of all, that if you are wanting to catch up on what's going on, you can have a look here. You can go onto the Camden Haven Anglican Church YouTube page, and you can see all the stuff that's been going on again, and been going on in what we've been doing. You know what I didn't do, and this is going to be a problem. I didn't work this one out, and let's, okay, we might not be able to do that. We'll see. So you can see here, you can see all sorts of different things, and so presently there's that one. We've got 16 watching or so. That's great. Last week though, we had 98 views on that. So 98, that's pretty good. Pretty pleased with that, and that's a pretty good Bible study. So I'm thankful that for those who watch, it's somehow helpful, and I hope that we're able to keep being helpful. I failed to set up the little bit where I sit in that corner and that sort of thing, so that might not happen today, but we'll see how we go. So yeah, if you need to catch up, you can certainly catch up by watching those online things, our online services. Let's see, I've got a few people here. We've got Brian and Donna, that's great. Great. June, oh, Simon's here. Okay, he's on. He's watching. Graham and Linda, g'day, and Norma and Daisy and Lois and Gary, and look, a whole bunch of people. That's fantastic. Really good to see you. Well, what we're going to look at tonight is the passage that actually Simon preached on Sunday. And can I say that if you didn't get a chance to listen to that sermon of Simon's, you would do well to pop back onto the... Oops, that's not what I'm doing. You would do well to pop back there and just click on that if you want the 8 a.m. version, or click on that one if you want the 10 a.m. version, and you could do worse. It's a very good sermon, and I think we really want to touch on some of the things that he spoke about tonight. So without any further ado, why don't we just jump into it? So we've been looking at Exodus, and we have spent our time up until this point. We've seen the people in exile. In exile, they're not in exile yet. In slavery, they're in Egypt. And then we saw them cry out to the Lord, and God raised up a deliverer named Moses. And that deliverer delivered them from Egypt, remembering that the key idea or key thought in Exodus is the question, who is the Lord? So when we ask who is the Lord, it's the question that Pharaoh asks, and it's the question that Israel asks. And what is going to happen is that Pharaoh will know that the Lord is the creator and judge. And the way that he is seen as creator and judge is that God has control over all of the elements, that is the rivers and the rain and all that sort of thing. So there's all the plagues that come upon Egypt are a statement to Egypt of that there is no other God like our God, that sort of thing. So there's the first thing, but it's also the question that Israel needs to ask, because Israel are evolving in their understanding of who God is. So not only will they see him as creator and as judge, but they will know him as rescuer. And by the way, not only will they know him as rescuer, but all of the Egyptians who are with Israel will know him as rescuer as well. Rescuer, ransomer, redeemer, all those sorts of things. So their understanding of God, their picture of God is expanding, not to something bigger than he is, but is beginning to grow into the bigness that God is. So that's some of the stuff that's happening there. And we saw Israel come out of Egypt through the Red Sea, and then they come through the Red Sea, and then after a little while they get to the mountain of God, that mountain that Moses was at back there with the burning bush, or the bush that didn't burn, in fact. That's the same mountain as Mount Sinai that the whole people were at. So there, a bush on fire that didn't burn, they come, the whole nation, a mountain on fire. And that is where the Ten Commandments are given. And then we saw as the Ten Commandments were given, the chapters immediately following those Ten Commandments being given, that chapter 21, 22, 23, 24, about those chapters, we saw that God had actually given was giving to Israel laws, legit laws, but also laws that helped them to work out how to meditate on those Ten Commandments. And so they saw that the Sabbath was not merely one day in 7, but it was 1 year in 7, and then 1 year in 7 times 7 years. And so the 7 times 7 was the great Jubilee Sabbath year, where everything reset. And if you'd lost your property because of bad deals or whatever, or your family had lost, your family then could catch up, and they were able to reset again. Pretty fantastic sort of thing. That was a real recognition, isn't it, that our stuff belongs to God. He's the giver, he's the provider, he's the owner of everything that we have. And there is a great reminder of the importance to be generous and that sort of stuff. So that was the year of Jubilee, and those sorts of things were how they thought through. Remember how they thought through too, for example, stealing is not simply, I should not steal something that's yours, but actually that expands and grows to be, if I keep to myself everything that I have, and I hold on to it for dear life, and I, for example, if I own a field, to speak back in the agricultural environment of the Hebrews at this stage, if I owned a field and I didn't leave that field every 7th year to lie fallow or to be rested, and then I didn't allow the people who were poor to be able to glean from it, or even the wild animals, I was effectively stealing from them. So I suppose the point is there that as we meditate on the commandments, they get bigger. I suppose that the commandments are mostly negative in that they are do not do things, but that not really creates a silhouette, and then we begin to colour the inside of that with trying to understand and meditate on what that commandment actually means in our everyday life, both in the way we live and the way that for the Hebrews back then, for the way they lived, but also for the way that they would judge things in court and stuff like that. Okay, well, we've got that far. How are we going? Oh, Lomax. Lomax is great. Good to see you. And, the dears are here. Good to see you. Great to have you. Jerry and Maxine. I hope Maxine's okay. She's been in our prayers. Certainly has been. Bunch of others. Ursula's here. Brenda's here. Oh, fantastic. June's here. Oh, June, yes, June. I did go and see that lady that you mentioned to me in hospital, and it was a really good visit. So thank you for bringing that to my attention and helping me out there, because that was a really important visit. So thank you for that. All right. So, okay, where are we at? We get to sort of the Ten Commandments and the little bit after them, which we hardly ever read. And then we seem to stop, but we're only at chapter 24 or something. And chapters 25 to 40 almost seem, I don't know, we seem very distant from them. We don't really know what's happened, unless you've read them, like someone I know who's Lomax is there. And as you read them, you begin to ask, okay, well, something's happening here. There's a lot of detail about this building of this instructions about how to build this thing called the tabernacle, whatever that is. Then there's a bit of exciting stuff happening in the middle with 32 to 34, chapters 32 to 34, which is what we're going to look at tonight. And then there's chapters 35 to the end, which sort of talk about this tabernacle again. So what's going on? Well, I want to suggest, I'm going to try and do it like this, see if this will work. Here we go. So I've got to remember which is which here. Let's go to 3, and I'll put it like this. So what we have is, oops, if you could see what was happening here, you'd laugh. Anyway, what we have is chapter 25. Why is this not working? Because I was rubbing it out. Chapter 25, all the way to chapter 31. And then chapters 35 to chapter 40 are all about the tabernacle. I'm sorry about this writing. I know that writing's terrible, but that's the best I can do at the moment in the strange position that I'm at. Right in the middle of this section is chapters 32 to 34, which is our one tonight. So why don't I do something special and highlight that? And this here is instruction about how to build the tabernacle. This here, this section of 35 to 40, this section of 35 to 40 is the construction of the tabernacle. And this section in the middle that we're going to look at tonight is this big question mark, a giant question mark. And I say a giant question mark because we've got the instructions for the tabernacle being built. We've got the construction of the actual tabernacle helping. But after we hear about the instructions, we get to this interruption. And it's this interruption that we look at tonight. And this is asking a most important question. This whole incident is asking a most important question. And the question is this, is the tabernacle is described as God dwelling with his people. This was going to be a tent that was made so that God could dwell with his people. Chapters 32 to 34, we find the people are disobeying God. They are sinful. Their hearts are turned against God. And the question is, here, I'm going to actually get to the question. The question is, it's how to build a tent. That's right. Yes, it's how to build a tent. The question in 32 to 34 is this: can a holy God live amongst an unholy people? Can a holy God live amongst an unholy people? There is the question that these verses raise. When we understand the answer to that question, then we will understand whether the tabernacle will be built or not. So we've got the instructions for it to be built, but will those instructions turn into construction, or will everything go out the window and the whole building plan go over the edge? Well, let's have a look at the passage today. So what I want you to do is actually turn to chapter turn to chapter 32 of Exodus, because we're going to sort of begin to flick through that what we're looking at. And so it'd be really good if you had it in front of you, and we're just going to look at it section by section. So first of all, we have this beginning section where it says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So think about it. There at the bottom of the mountain, they haven't seen Moses for I think it's 40 days. It says there 40 days somewhere. And they realise that, very significant. He's gone for 40 days, in the wilderness 40 years. It rained 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days, 40 nights. 40 is a very symbolic number. Now, what we've got is the people they're impatient, aren't they? They're saying, well, we haven't seen Moses. Notice, Moses, the one who brought us up out of Egypt. We haven't seen him, so let's create something that we can see. I need to see. I need to see. I need to feel. I need to experience. That's what Israel is saying. And so they say to Aaron, come on, let's build a god. Aaron answers them. This is very interesting up here. Let me see if I can get that a bit closer. Oops, that's further. That's not what we want. There we go. Sorry if that all gave you a headache. Aaron answered, take off the gold earrings and that your wives and your sons and daughters are wearing, and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they had handed to him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." So, and then he builds a little altar as well, and that sort of thing. So what we've got here is Aaron saying, "Okay, well, here's a plan. You want a god you can see? Give me all your earrings. We'll make a golden calf." Now, they take off their earrings, they hand them to him, he takes it, and then he fashions a calf. There's the picture of what happens. Now, we don't know how big the calf was. I mean, how many earrings does it take to make a calf? I don't know. That sounds like a joke, doesn't it? At the beginning of joke, maybe you could think of a funny answer to that. But it might have only been small. It might have been this big. Or maybe it was the size of a table, or I don't know. We don't know how big it was. The fact was that they carved a calf. Oh, sorry. And because that's what the mum did, didn't it? Carved. Anyway, and they fashioned it with a tool. Now, interesting to say fashioned it with a tool. Just earlier on, God had said, whenever you make an altar to me, you must not use a tool. So here already there's some stuff going on that's not quite right. When Aaron saw this, he built this altar, and the next day the people sat down. It says afterwards they sat down to eat and drank and got up to indulge in revelry, which is pretty much they gorged themselves, and then they had an orgy. That's what happened. That's what went on. And there's what's happening at the bottom of the mountain, Mount Sinai, after they have been given the 10 Commandments. Now remember, the second commandment was do not make an image, and yet they're already doing this, making this image. Now, here is what we've got to think about. Someone has asked the question, what's the significance of 40 days? Well, I think that's a great question. And I think the significance of 40, there's a whole bunch of 40s in Exodus. So remember that Moses is born. He was born at a very early age. And then when he's 40, he kills the Egyptian and sees the Hebrews fighting, and then he goes out into the wilderness. He then is in the wilderness for 40 years, and then he's 80. Then he comes back to lead the people out into the wilderness. He leads them into the wilderness and wandering to the promised land for 40 years. He then he doesn't get to go into the promised land. The people go into the promised land. So already there's a very significant number, 40, is being created by Exodus. Now the question is there 40 in Genesis? Well, there is. There's the 40 days and 40 nights of the rain. Is there any other 40s? I'll have to have a look and think about that. But then we have Jesus, 40 days fasting in the wilderness. Now, all of this, it may not have been a literal 40 days. We've got to see that. The numbers in the Bible are almost never literal. And I know that is a controversial statement to make. They are never literal. They almost never literal, but they are always, almost, symbolic. There is meaningfulness in that. And so we find out that because in Exodus there was such a significance with the number 40 years in the desert particularly, we find that when Jesus spends 40 days in the desert, we're meant to think back to and not just see it as it just happened to be 40 days, but that his journey, his pilgrimage, his whatever you want to call it in the desert is parallel to what the Israelites went through. So there's a little bit on the number 40 there. But here's the point for tonight that we need to think through. If you were to ask those Israelites who were there bowing down to a calf and ask them the question, are you worshipping God, the true God? What would they say? They would say yes, wouldn't they? Yes, I am worshipping God. I am worshipping the God who brought us up out of Egypt. They are saying we're worshipping the Creator, Judge, Redeemer, rescuing God, full of grace. That's the one that we're worshipping. Now, so put it this way, what we need to see is that their idolatry was not that they were worshipping a false god, but they were worshipping God falsely, and that is called idolatry. We need to think about this. We need to think on this. We need to put on our thinking caps and screw them in tight, because there is a way to worship God, and if we do not worship God God's way, no matter how well-meaning we are, no matter how well-intentioned we are, we fail to worship God properly. And when we fail to worship God properly, it is idolatry. Now, we're used to saying that what really matters is the heart. That is, they were well-intentioned, so that's okay. Well, in a bunch of situations, yes, that is okay. To be well-intentioned, but to be mistaken, that's all right. But not when it comes to worshipping God. So here what we find is that they say, we are going to worship God in a way that he has said not to do it. False worship of the true God is idolatry. Okay. I wonder if you're sort of catching on to that. Because it's so important for us to think about. There's a bunch of ways people talk, and I had some wrote some down before. Let me just pop them out and have a look at them. I'll worship God my way. No, we worship God God's way. Sometimes people say, my greatest worship is in the garden. Now, I'm going to be careful here. I'm not saying you can't worship God in the garden. But if for some reason the garden, which you love, gardening, is the way you worship God, then it borders on idolatry. It's so subtle, all of this. We must be very careful that we don't create any sort of blanket rules that that cover everybody who gardens is there for a false worship. But no, we have to think this through really carefully, because let's put it this way. There are some people who say you don't have to go to church to worship God. And, there is some truth in that. But usually it comes from a heart that says, I don't want to go to church. And although God says to meet with his people, let's say go to a formal meeting and tick that box off so that make sure you've done it. No, to go to church is to go to the gathering. It's to meet with God's people. That is where the crescendo, the highlight of our week of worship is at. So if you delete that, high point, then you're beginning to fashion God in your own image, beginning to fashion a golden calf. You're still saying, I worship God. You're still saying, you could even say, I love God. But what it is that you love is that you love the God that you have made, the God in your image, the God who says, you don't have to be committed to other people, the God who says, you don't have to, whatever it is, come along to church. This is a new God, and we're beginning to worship God in a way that he has said not to. We've begun to shape a calf. What else? I've put here a couple of other things. Some of the staff and I thought about this. What are the calf path, we called it. I wonder if there is sort of a way of worshipping that it's the ticker box thing. It says, yes, well, I do go to church and I do tick the box. I've been to church, I've had communion, it's been done the right way, I've made sure the Lord's Prayer has been said, all the rules have been followed, therefore it's been done. Well, no. You could effectively have just built a very religious-looking calf, and sometimes the calf can look a lot like the Anglican Church. Now, I'm actually pretty cautiously proud of being Anglican. I really do think that the history of the Anglican Church, the doctrines of the Anglican Church, and the practice of the Anglican Church are, in most cases, really, really good and really, really helpful. But I don't want to create a Anglican-shaped calf, do I? And say, well, I'm doing all the right Anglican things, therefore I'm worshipping God. No. Jesus says to the woman at the well, doesn't he? There'll be a day when you worship in spirit and in truth. And that is certainly true of the believer. We worship in spirit and in truth. What other ones did I think here? Oh, feels first. Sometimes our worship of God is like a fix, a weekly fix. Now, I need to be careful saying this because I could be heard to be saying what I'm not saying. So if you hear me saying something that you're upset with, then maybe check with me to make sure I'm saying it. Because if I am saying what I'm saying and you've heard that and you're upset, then maybe you should be. But if I'm not saying that, then maybe you shouldn't be. Sorry. Here we go. I do wonder whether the fascination, and it's a pretty recent sort of thing, our emphasis on music, which moves us, we've begun to, could it be that we have begun to create a music-shaped calf, that the feels that I get, that I come along to church and it's like I get a feel fix. I have to just disconnect with the world for a moment. I might raise my hands and close my eyes and be in another world and sway from side to side or whatever it might be. That is potentially idolatry or idolatrous. Now, don't get me wrong. When you see someone with their hands raised and their eyes closed and they're worshipping God like that, it doesn't necessarily mean it's idolatry. But we've got to think it through, haven't we? We've really got to ask that question. Is my worship of God true worship? I'm worshipping the true God, but I could be worshipping him falsely. Did I have any other things written down about that? One thing Travis said, I think Travis said this anyway, in our staff meeting was that the Word should shape worship. And so what the Word needs to be, our worship services, notice that, our hour or two on a Sunday needs to be shaped by the Word. Now that's true for the rest of our week, needs to be shaped by the Word as well. But our worship needs to be shaped by the Word. The Israelites, their worship was not shaped by the Word. It was actually going against the Word, and yet they still claim. Ellen has asked a question. Let's see what it is. What about when someone is old and it's not easy for them to get to church anymore, and they don't have a smartphone or computer to go online? Is it enough that they already have a strong faith? Of course, the answer is yes. If you can't get to church, then God's not going to say, "Well, you should have got to church." You can't do it. You can't do it. I would say though that this situation that Ellen is telling us about is one that would cast a dark shadow over the church that person was involved with. Because when someone can't get to church, then the church needs to go to them. When someone can't get to church, the church needs to go to them. And that can be anything, like in a visit, go and see somebody in hospital, being aware of people who aren't there and giving them a call. Say, "Are you okay? Is everything fine? Can we come and see you?" And not to check up on you, but to love you, to be in church with you, to be churching with you, gathering as the people of God. So I would hope, she says, phew, my mum is 89. She's talking about her mum. Yeah, so I think that that's a really good question. And I would hope that your mum's local church would be able to visit her. That sounds pretty fun. Well, okay, how are we going? Well, I actually want to phone a friend. So I'm going to try and do this. So we're going to do, hopefully this works. Let's open that up and let's go this one. Oh, I'm ringing someone. And I'm going to go super source. Oh, look, we're ringing Simon. Because I'm going to ask him some questions. Let's see if it works. Oh, he's answered. Hello, Simon.
Hello.
Is that working? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I think I can. I wonder if everybody else can hear. They won't be able to tell me until for 20 seconds, though. That's one of the problems. Okay. Can I move that over there? Let's see. I can. There we go. All right. How you going?
Yeah, right.
And
it's approaching Jude's bath time, so if there's a screaming baby and I'm rushing out the room,
really?
What's going on?
Okay, so did Jude eat his dinner tonight?
He has, I believe.
Okay.
He's a hungry boy. He's asleep at the moment, but
okay.
Could be asleep for a long while.
Yeah, right. Well, that's good if he's asleep for a long while. So, let's see. Yes, Graham Cooper says he can hear it. So thank you for your sermon on Sunday. It was really great. I really enjoyed it. And one of the things I really enjoyed was you dealt with an issue that is really hard to think through, and that is the bits that come a little bit later. So let me just remind people what that is. It's down here from verse 7 onwards. Exodus chapter 32, verses 7 through to what? About 14 or something, 14, 15. So what happens in these verses is that God seems to sort of chuck a bit of a tantrum, like Jude might chuck a tantrum. And he says, look, I've had it. I'm sick of these guys and girls. They don't seem to care about me. And I told them not to make any cast idols. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe them all out. And I'm going to start anew with you, Moses. And then Moses goes, no, don't do that. That's a bad idea, God. What will the Egyptians think of you? Well, and then God changes his mind. Now, I sort of get why people feel that this is a bit disconcerting, because we've got a God who chucks a tantrum, decides to do something, then changes his mind. So I don't know. Can you tell us what your thoughts are on this? Sorry to put you in it like that, but yeah.
It's easy to think that Moses has come up with an idea and maybe God thinks, oh, I hadn't thought of that, so that's a good idea, Moses, let's roll with that. But I suppose, and it can raise lots of questions about prayer as well, potentially, and our role in that, or if that has any effect. But I suppose what I mentioned on Sunday was that God turned from what he ought to do and show justice to what he delights to do and show mercy to his people. And so, I guess it reveals that God he's always been sovereign, he always will be, and it reveals his mercy and his grace. And so, God hasn't changed his mind, but he's ordained this moment, and he's fed Moses the lions to reveal his mercy, because God's people should have wiped it out, but he's using Moses, and it's not Moses' power, but it's God's power through the whole moment.
Yeah. So is it possible that this sort of thing is what would be called a rhetorical device? Because it really does, as people are reading it, the effect of it is to make them stop and think, really, what's going on here? And when the Bible does that to us, then it's probably because it wants us to stop and think. So is it really, it's not meant to make us destabilized about who God is, but it's to reinforce who God is, the keeper of promises, that sort of thing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it's not at all us, but it reinforces God's sovereignty, his power, and it makes me, I remember first reading this thinking, my prayer is so powerful that I can change God's mind, that actually, or other end of the spectrum, my prayer is meaningless, because God is just always going to do whatever he wants. But I suppose it shows that God is, in control. He's ordained the means and the ends, but that leads us to true worship of him in a way. Moses displays that true and proper faith, and the right way to worship him, compared to worshipping our way, or how we want to.
Okay, so if God can relent from his judgment, is that right? Like, if he can just say, oh, look, I'll just overlook that. Where is the justice in that? I'm not sure. That now doesn't leave me comforted, because God seems to be able just to overlook the wrong thing happening. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It upsets anyone when any leader or anything is overlooked, any injustice. And I suppose we still see God's judgment poured out on the 3,000.
Oh, yeah.
Who were killed later on, so that God uses, or killing those ringleaders who were involved with it. So, obviously frustrating if he just overlooks it, but good to know that he, if he deals with it, which I suppose will be revealed later on.
Yeah, so when you say later on, you mean on the cross?
That's a pretty good moment. As, the ultimate mediator.
Yes, the ultimate mediator, that's right. So, so I'm reading questions at the same time as talking, so I'm thinking my brain is going in two directions. Okay, that's really helpful, actually. I think there's a really important thing. So can you sort of put in a nutshell what you sort of think of your sermon on Sunday, 32 to 34? What sort of brain waves come to you now to try and pull that together for us? Any thoughts? I'm putting him on the spot here, by everyone.
I think God revealing his mercy through that moment, that Israel deserved justice, but they received mercy, and God appointed Moses as a mediator. I think we read earlier in Ezekiel, God is looking for someone to step in between the gap of his faithless people and a faithful God, but he can't find anyone. But I suppose in this moment it's Moses, and later on it's Jesus, who is the one to make atonement, because Moses is a sinful man. He offers himself to blot it out, but he can't. But Jesus, is the ultimate atoning sacrifice, who, is perfect and the ultimate mediator.
Cool. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. It's great to have a different face. Everyone will be happy with your face instead of mine. And you better go and look at Jude's face, and make sure he's having his bath. So anyway, thank you for talking to us tonight. I'll say see you later. See ya. Bye. Okay, drop that out. Go back to there. Well, there you go. It's good to have Simon back with us. Let me just move a microphone so that it doesn't. Oops, I'll pull that right into view. Now we're actually going to finish on time. You're not going to believe it. Let me go back to that question that we had at the beginning. There are instructions for the building of a tabernacle. There is then an interruption of the people's sinfulness, which does call into question, will there be the construction of the temple? Now, we know the answer because it was built, and so we know yes. But the question is, can God live amongst an unholy people? Can God bear being near sin? What's the answer? The answer is yes. He can live amongst an unholy people, but with the qualification that this tabernacle that will be built, at the very heart of it is sacrifice. And what will happen in sacrifice is that sacrifice will cover over the sins of the people. It will make them holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Holy is what God's holy people are to be. So if we're unholy or sinful, we, in theory, cannot be near God, and yet he comes and dwells amongst the people, amongst an unholy people, but his coming amongst them is to make them holy. He is bringing with him the way to make people right with him. How do I get right with God? The way I get right with God is by the means he has provided for me to get right with him. What God demands, he also provides. What God demands, he also provides. He demands that we be holy, and he provides that holiness initially in the tabernacle with the whole sacrificial system that surrounded. But project that forward and we see Jesus. So, let's just go back a minute. The tabernacle becomes the temple. The temple is the place, of sacrifice. Very at the heart of the temple was sacrifice. Project that forward, we see Jesus, who says the words, "Pull down this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days." And John chapter 2 says that he's talking about his body, that he was talking about himself, that he is the temple. Him being the temple, then Paul will say, those who are in him, those who are in Christ, are indwelt by the Spirit. And where does the Spirit dwell in the Old Testament? The Spirit dwells in the temple. And so the glory of God, the Spirit of God, is in the people of God. So they are made holy. So Peter will say, you have been made holy, so be holy. There is the comfort. You have been made holy by the blood of Jesus Christ. His sacrifice has paid the penalty for your sins. He has reconciled you to God. He has made you to be what you couldn't be in yourself. He has made a way open for you to be right with him. The only way that you can be right with him is by the means that he has provided for you to be right with him, and that is through the blood of Jesus Christ. So as you say, yes, I take that on board. Wash me clean. Wash me and I'll be whiter than snow. Let the blood of the Lamb wash over me. All of those sorts of sayings that come beautifully out of Scripture. And they explain our experience. But it doesn't stop there. The important thing is you have been made holy, so be holy. And you and I are to, and us together, are to look out for one another, to care for one another. We want to grow one another in holiness. We want to ask one another hard questions and say, how are you going? How are you going with the Lord? You're holy. Don't get that wrong. But how are you living holy? That sort of thing. Where in your life now, where in my life, do we need to grow in holiness? Where are there bits we've got to chuck off and get away and grow in that? Well, in a nutshell, can God live with an unholy people? The answer is yes, because he's going to make a way for them to be holy, and that'll be through sacrifice. How will the holy people worship God? They will not only come the way that he has provided to be right with him, but they will worship the way that he has provided to worship him. And that is not fashioning a God of our own image, but to realize that we are in his image and him, not him in ours. And we are to live lives, as the New Testament will unpack, lives of worship. So Romans 12, in view of God's mercy, we offer our bodies as living sacrifice. There is an essential nature of service that appears, that we love others, that we show that we are Christians by our love for one another, that we put God first, that we put him first in our finances, in our friends, in our relationships, in our riches, in our time and talent and treasures and all that sort of thing. We put him first. We seek first the kingdom of God. Our hearts seek him, but our hearts seek him informed by the mind that has listened to the word. We don't create calves of good feels and that's all we want, or religious ticking boxes, or whatever else. We need to meditate on that, because I think you can think of things that I haven't talked about tonight. But that's who we are. We're a real fair income people for a real fair income God. Well, I think that's... there was a few questions here that I missed, so I might have to visit those later on, and we'll see how we go with that. But I want to say thank you so much for being here tonight. It's always good to be with you, and I am looking forward to Sunday, actually. Really ask that you'd pray for Sunday, because I'm really trying to think through how this next passage works together. It's so important, and sometimes the weight of it is just too much. And I think this is so important to get across, and it's almost debilitating sometimes. So please pray that we can work on that. So I will say it's been awesome to see you, and see you later.